Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Item number 2, approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the minutes. The November 16, 2017 Planning Commission minutes. Make a motion to approve the November 16th Planning Commission minutes.
I'll move to approve it.
Microphone, Jim.
You heard me.
No, but we need to hear you.
I'll make a motion to approve the
I'll
November 16th minutes.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And then item 3.2, motion to approve the November 16th joint session minutes. I'll make a motion to approve the joint session meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, then moving on to item number 4, public hearing.
No public hearing.
Public hearing. So
There isn't any public hearings this evening.
we don't have to open or do anything?
No.
Okay, then we'll
Move on.
quickly went through that.
Perfect.
And then moving on to the next item, number 5, new business, which is Planning Commission 101.
Yeah, thank you, members of the Planning Commission. This is something that is probably long overdue, and with some new members to the commission, we just wanted to kind of run through the roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission. Some of this will be old hat for some of you, and some of this will be new to some or all of you, depending upon kind of the areas that we talk about. But first one is kind of go over kind of your role within kind of the whole city organization. And so the city has 3 advisory commissions: the Heritage Preservation Commission, the Parks Commission, and the Planning Commission. Each has different roles in a recommendation fashion. The Planning Commission has some unique responsibilities as it pertains to land use and working with the comprehensive plan. And so that's why you see alternates on this commission. Some of our commissions, we don't have alternates. So in order to have a quorum, we have a 5-member planning commission. We need 3 members present in order to make sure that we can keep that quorum and frankly have a full 5-member commission as many times as possible so we can get a thorough review. We have 2 alternates, a first alternate and a second alternate, so that if one of the main planning commission members can't make it, that means that alternate can come up and be a voting member. Well, that doesn't mean that the alternates don't participate in the conversations and the dialogue and the discussion of a certain planning request or land use application. They can ask applicants the questions. They can bring up concerns and fully participate in the conversation. It's just the matter of the quorum ends up being the 5 members that are the voting members. The alternates only vote if there's a absent member of the full voting member commission. And that kind of gets into the quorum piece, in that anytime 3 of you are meeting or emailing, etc., that constitutes a quorum. So we can really only meet in a quorum when we've posted the meeting, we've set an agenda, and that agenda will say what topics that we get on. And so from time to time, when Cindy's sending out correspondence or somebody else from the city will say, please do not reply all, because we've emailed all 7 of you with certain information. If any one of you replies all to that, you've in essence had a meeting, you've had deliberations or connections. And so typically it's something that by saying like yes or gotcha, it's not going to really hurt anything, but we prefer you not to do that. And so if there's a question that you have of staff, just reply to us directly. And then on the bottom here, you can see kind of the full slate of the city departments. We have other consultant services, but I did want to point out the city planner position. That's something that the city just posted yesterday, or actually Tuesday. It is interesting that within about an hour and a half, we had an application for the position. So I think it's a desirable position. So I think we're going to have many applicants, and I'm actually working on some ways that I'd like to try to integrate the Planning Commission into the selection process. Right now, I haven't worked out all the bugs, but I'd like to get, whether it's our top 2 or top 3 candidates, in a position where they, in essence, give a presentation to the Planning Commission. I'd like to kind of see them in action, give you all a chance to ask them questions related to their presentation, and kind of see how they think on their feet, get an idea of their planning and communication skills in a kind of a real-life setting. We'll still have Cindy helping us out on the comprehensive plan, and until we get a sense of where this planner is on their kind of experience journey, we might have Cindy help out along that path in 2018. Anything that any of you have questions about so far as we move on? I'm just going to hit on kind of the 2 main objectives, and then Cindy's going to kind of dig into the details. But if you think about your role as Planning Commission members, there's really 2 objectives. And with projects, sometimes there could be many facets, but we really, as a Planning Commission, we'd like you to kind of drill down into these 2. And one is to review the compatibility with the project with the comprehensive plan. So that's looking at the future land use plan that we were discussing tonight. That's talking about density. Sometimes when projects come in, even though it has a certain land use, whether it's high, medium, or low density, they might be looking to do different things as far as putting more density in one part of the project than in the other. Looking at traffic concerns, we have projects that are adjacent to county roads. We're looking at maybe a collector road system, how all those things interchange. City utilities, so that can be stormwater, water, sanitary, sewer, and looking at how not only the project handles its own needs, but how it impacts other surrounding properties. Parks and open space, trails, do they have the appropriate trails? Are they connected into our network? And then any other environmental issues. And so it's not only reviewing that, but then when you have a public hearing, like Commissioner Lane had kind of opened up, if we had one, it's listening to residents and other stakeholders to see what their concerns are. And so then viewing that through a lens of your own analysis and then what you've heard, and then making a decision whether or not you think it meets the standards within the comprehensive plan. And then the second major objective is reviewing compliance with the subdivision and zoning ordinances. So that's looking at lot size, setbacks, parking when it comes to a site plan on a commercial or industrial setting, whether it's a permitted use. We haven't had a lot of these, but there can be conditional use permits where a certain use may be allowed at a certain zoning district, but they have to meet different standards as it relates to their hours of operation or parking or signage. And oftentimes those might end up in neighborhoods that have concerns. And so you're listening to neighborhood concerns and then setting conditions on what that conditional use is. And so one of the things that it took me even a while to understand is on a conditional use, you actually have to allow that use. But what the conditional use is it allows you the ability to set conditions on them functioning and using that use within that zoning district. So as an example, a number of years ago, we had a woodworking shop that wanted to operate out of the downtown, and it could function as a conditional use. So they can operate, but the Planning Commission had the ability then to set conditions on, when power tools were used and hours of operation, their, off-street parking requirements, et cetera. Then there's also prohibited uses, so if it gets into quite a number of years ago, there was a lot of ordinances that were taking place with adult businesses, and so how far those are away from schools and other requirements that they might have, and then variances. And so, and Cindy will probably get into the variance piece a little bit more in her part of the presentation. The best way that I know how to explain that is if you had a home and you wanted to put on a sun porch or an addition, and you built that addition and you had about a 15-foot setback. Well, the zoning ordinance says you need 20 feet. So are you able to show the Planning Commission and the City Council and the impacted residents that you have some type of hardship, that because of this setback requirement, you can't enjoy your property to the fullest extent, or whatever those list of variances might be? And so every time you'd get an application, your city planner then would go over and say, okay, this is what the applicant is saying their hardships are, then it would be up to the planning commission to make a recommendation to the city council on whether or not you thought that they met the criteria for meeting that hardship for their property. So oftentimes when a project will come in, whether it's housing, commercial, industrial, there are other facets as far as, is it going to be in a tax increment district, what types of public subsidies are given, and some of those things can kind of creep into the discussion. And what the goal of the planning commission is to stay within those two objectives. Is it consistent with the comprehensive plan, and does it meet the regulations set forth in the zoning and subdivision ordinances? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to
Thank you. So I wanted to take a little deeper dive into some of the things that Brent was mentioning, and talk about sort of the process that every project ends up going through. You don't always see it on every project, however, but I'll kind of walk you through the steps. And I think it's important to do that because a lot of you have experienced where we all might be talking about something for months or even years occurring, and then all of a sudden it's when dirt is being moved on a site that you start to hear from the residents about, well, how could this possibly have happened? So I'm going to walk through the sort of the timeline and process that's a little bit different for every project, but everything ultimately had to follow this to get to where it is when it's constructed. So the very first thing is the comprehensive plan. I put it on this slide as a comprehensive plan amendment, but really what we're looking at is the project in compliance with the comprehensive plan? That's the point where the city, planning commission, and the council have the most ability to set policy and influence the design of the city. And of course, that's the purpose of what we've been meeting for before every one of these meetings, and we'll continue to do so. Once something's in compliance with the comprehensive plan, ultimately it will basically have to be allowed if it can check off the rest of the boxes along the way. And I think that's something that the comprehensive plan is kind of in some respects, a very vague document for residents, because it doesn't show you that specific. Is there going to be a Hy-Vee located right on this parcel? Well, none of us know that at this point in time. We're just guiding it for commercial development. It could be a Hy-Vee, it could be something else, or somebody could come in later and ask for this comprehensive plan amendment. The comprehensive plan amendment, when someone does ask for that, the city has complete discretion as to whether or not you want to change the comprehensive plan. Just because somebody asks for it doesn't mean that you have to agree with them that that's a good idea. So you would look at, and at the time when those are being requested, you're going to look at everything from impact on the area, traffic concerns, environmental concerns, and general compatibility to determine if that's something that you're interested in changing.
One thing I also want to mention about the comprehensive plan is not as, when we set it up, we're trying to define what types of areas we want where, but we're not being very specific about what's going to be there, but we're also not specific about the timing, right? This is a comprehensive plan for 20 years?
Correct. The
Right,
comprehensive
for 20 years. So that development could happen at any time in there, right? And so some of the things I've heard from residents have been, this is going in too fast. Well, we don't control this, right? We don't control the developers. We don't control when people sell things. All we say is, here's how we would like to see the land use guided for at some point in over those 20 years, right?
Yes, generally. The plan horizon is 20 years. Our comprehensive plan has an area that is, you also are planning to certain forecasts for both households, population, and employment numbers. And those are numbers that are negotiated between the city and the Metropolitan Council, generally speaking. We developed the plan based on your orderly annexation area. That area happens to be quite a bit larger than what those 2040, in this case, forecasts would accommodate. So we're really looking at more like we're planning out the whole thing to make sure that you make wise decisions as a city in terms of the investments that you make in infrastructure. Do you put in an 18-inch pipe or a 20-inch,
Right.
30-inch pipe in certain locations, so that you don't have to redo those investments too early in the future. So our planning horizon is much longer than the 20 years. That said, it's sort of logical that because the forecasts are given for the years 2030 and 2040, you're also saying how fast development's going to occur. That generally, or how slow, depending on the community that we're talking about here, if there is a high level of new homes that are projected between 2020 and 2030, that probably means you're going to see some pretty fast growth in that community, and that's the case in Carver. If other communities might see 100 homes being built, clearly they're not going to be growing very fast in that decade. A lot of it is market-driven, where you are in the community, in sort of a community life cycle. Different communities are going to grow at different rates depending on where they are and sort of what's going on in their area. The next step is the zoning map. I've labeled it in this process as a rezoning or a PUD. The zoning map implements your comprehensive plan. Basically, if something is shown as commercial on your comprehensive plan, in your zoning map, if it's not developed land, right now it's going to show as agricultural. If it's out in the township, it's not going to show as anything because you don't have jurisdiction to zone for it. If it's in the city and developed or developing, it's probably going to show as one of your different zoning districts, freeway commercial district or general commercial district. And both of those would be considered to be compliant with that commercial guidance in the comprehensive plan. What you can't do when you're rezoning is if somebody came in and said, on a piece that's commercial, if someone came in and said, I want to build homes here, you can't just rezone it to a residential category because your comp plan still says it needs to be commercial. So that's where we go back to that comprehensive plan amendment piece. The applicant will have asked for that. You have all of that discretion to say you will or won't. But likely, if you are willing to do that, you will follow through then and rezone it accordingly as well to match that plan. The PUD piece is important because it's where we can take a master planned site that a developer is proposing, and we can essentially vary from your strict regulations in your zoning ordinance, depending on how they have accommodated for those different items in the master plan. For example, the project that you'll be seeing later tonight, because the Planning Commission recently reviewed that, if you recall, there's those villa lots that have a very small side yard setback. So that project came in as a planned unit development as well. And through that PUD process, they're controlling the use of those setbacks. We've reviewed that, their plan for how they're going to do that, and impose conditions upon that to ensure that those smaller setbacks are going to be something that's a desirable quality for that neighborhood. And that's what you use the PUD process for. From there, the next step for anything, whether it's homes or commercial, is to do that preliminary plat. We have to do the initial layout and taking of that vacant piece of land and putting roads and utilities and creating lots out of that parcel. And that's a process that you see fairly frequently at this Planning Commission. Last year you did a few different preliminary plats. And again, you're looking for compliance with not just your subdivision regulations then, but we're also looking for how does it match your zoning. Many of your plats have come in as PUDs, so we haven't, we structure them so that they're getting specific variations from your underlying zoning, and that's how you've typically seen those. Final plat is the next step in that process. The preliminary plat developed the very preliminary plans for the engineering. The final plat refines that significantly, and in some cases, it just plats portions of a neighborhood rather than the whole neighborhood, because when we're talking about 50 or 80 acres, typically a developer doesn't want to install all of that infrastructure up front at one time. So we're looking at the final plat in phases typically. They're going to be addressing all the comments from your preliminary plat phase and preparing their construction plan so that they can reach a point where they can start the mass grading and installation of all the utilities on the site. The final step is the site plan. This can be done as either a part of the building permit process, which you don't see in the case of a single-family home. That's something that your building official then is handling. Or in the case of a commercial development in Carver, you do see that. Those commercial site plans come back to you for review and approval. And that's the last step. And at that point, you are really just checking the boxes, basically. Does it meet the setbacks? And again, those setbacks could be either what's in their underlying zoning district or as part of that plan development. Do they meet all the requirements? And if they do, you have to grant the permit. Any questions about sort of that phasing before I go on? So the other thing I wanted to show you was the pyramid of discretion that the city has. I kind of alluded to it a little bit in some of the items. At the bottom of the period, the basic building block, again, is your comprehensive plan. You have the most amount of discretion when you're creating the plan itself. That's when you're basically creating legislation for the city, as opposed to applying legislation. So you're making the rules at this point in time for that, along with the zoning and subdivision regulations, which again have to be consistent with your comp plan. So that's why they have a little bit less flexibility, because you can't suddenly do something that's different than what your comp plan says in what you put into your zoning regulations. But because it's creating that much greater level of detail, you still have a lot of discretion when you're preparing your zoning ordinance themselves. When you get to the subdivision applications, you have some discretion, but you are reaching that point now where you're applying your regulations rather than creating them. So your discretion comes in, the typical form that it's really coming in is trying to partner with the developer to create a win-win situation for both parties. Can we move this trail to this location? The city would really rather prefer it here. Those kind of items, trying to influence and create that better situation. You also have some amount of discretion in your conditional use permits and your variances, because again, you're applying the standards, but you're also using judgment in determining what the appropriate conditions are to place on both of those. And then when you get up to that top of the pyramid with the plan review and the building permits, we're really just reviewing to make sure it meets requirements. It's an administrative function essentially, and there's very little discretion at that point in time. Anybody have any questions or anything anyone wants to add or talk about? If not, I think we can move on to the Trinity final plat.
All right. Thank you. Where's this?
Okay, thank you. Then 5.2, the final plat.
Just wait for the slide to pop up here. Before you tonight is the final plat. It's basically for phase 1 of the Meadows at Spring Creek. The city did approve the preliminary plat for this project back in the spring of this year. This first final plat will consist of about 45 villa lots and 32 single-family lots. It is going to, I'm going to just jump ahead to the next slide real quick because it shows it a little bit better here. The first edition essentially takes the Green Ash Drive connection from the Spring Creek neighborhood and where it currently dead ends in a cul-de-sac, and extends that to the east, to the intersection with Mulberry Lane, and incorporates all of those, plats all of those lots that are on that street, adds in Mulberry Lane until it intersects with Birch Street, which provides that connection to the property to the south as well as part of this first phase of the preliminary plat. And Birch Street is constructed up to where it would intersect with Spring Creek Drive. There's also a little stub of the, kind of the horseshoe part of Mulberry Lane that is incorporated into this first phase of the development. Other key features of this is that there are lots fronting along Spring Creek Drive. Spring Creek Drive itself would be converted into an urban section of road, so that means curb and gutter, as opposed to today where it's a ditch and no curb.
Oh.
And the trail that exists in the Spring Creek neighborhood would be constructed at that point in time as well across the front of this development, and the power lines would also be removed as part of this first phase and buried underground. All of the entire site will be graded, however, with the first phase, so their construction approvals that they're seeking are to grade the whole thing. They just wouldn't be installing their streets and utilities through those, sort of that southeast portion of Green Ash Drive, as well as the rest of the horseshoe around Mulberry Lane. They would save that for a future phase. All of the stormwater ponds would be constructed at this time, though, because they're all needed in order to make the stormwater adequately flow across the site. There are a couple different areas of bluff on this site. In the far southwest corner, there's an area of bluff that's being preserved in an outlet that'll be managed by the HOA. And as there is also another one on the southeast corner that's quite a bit larger. And then there's a portion sort of in the northeast area as well that's not quite bluff, but there are some environmental resources in that location, and that'll also be managed by the HOA. Anywhere that you see stormwater ponds, those will be outlets that'll be deeded over to the city for long-term maintenance and ownership. There'll be sidewalks constructed on one side of every street, and I think that's really all I want to chat about at this point. I'll turn it over to Todd Cushman with Trinity Development, and he can add anything else, and then I might fill in a few more details. I don't want to leave him with nothing to talk about. Let him talk about the builder and
So thank you, members of the Planning Commission. I'm excited to be back here again. It's been a little while. It seemed like last spring we were kind of moving along pretty good, and then as we got to I don't know, later on in the summer, we were really hoping that there might be an opportunity to kind of get through City Council with final plat, but there were still a few hurdles that we needed to kind of get through in order to feel comfortable with moving forward with this development. So at that time, we kind of chose just to put a brief pause so we could work through with city staff and engineering and wetland and everything in order to come together with the items that needed to still happen in order to feel comfortable with moving forward. So as of right now, we're back in, and we're looking for the opportunity to kind of work through over the next city council meeting for final plat, to work with city staff, put together our final plans, and move forward this upcoming spring with actually moving dirt. So not too much has changed from what you may have seen in the past. We are still working with a builder partner, which is MI Homes, who is now, at this time, is now currently working in the city. When we first started this application and everything, they weren't, but now they are currently here. So we're working with them in other developments around the area over in Victoria, and they're also out in Cologne. And they have similar projects in those areas to this one that have been very successful. So I know they're very excited to keep working here in the city of Carver. And with the Villa product, very excited to bring that product into to this city. Also, that has been one of their more successful products that they've had around this area of the Twin Cities. So with that, yeah, I'd love to answer any other questions that you may have.
Is there a resolution to the strip of land?
Yep, I'll cover that. I was going to cover that next.
Okay.
The city, as most of you are aware, there is a 16.5-foot wide strip of land that separates the Spring Creek neighborhood from the Butler property, which is this proposed neighborhood. That was something that we had left in the preliminary plat as kind of an open item that needed to be resolved. The way that that ended up being resolved is that the city acquired a portion of that 16.5-foot strip of land. That's the area that's needed to connect Green Ash Drive. The developer and the property owner haven't been able to work out anything regarding the rest of that strip of land. So that we'll still leave it as an open possibility in the conditions of approval, that as they come in with their future final plat for Phase 2, that if they work out something that could be included within that final plat. But for now, I think we need to plan that the city, will make the connection through Green Ash Drive, but that there may very well be a 16.5-foot strip of land separating these two neighborhoods.
To the north and south of that
The
drive?
north and south of Green
Okay.
Ash Drive.
Right.
Where would Phase 2 be?
I may let Todd address that in case, because I'm not aware for sure of whether the whole thing's going to come in as Phase 2 or if you'll split it into 2 phases, Todd?
Yeah, we would be expecting pretty much Phase 2 to encompass everything else that is not part of Phase 1. But some of that may vary just depending on how sales and everything go with our builder partner, and just to make sure that we have a nice, even, steady flow. They do look at a lot of which areas that they're going to do to make sure that they have the right type of housing, whether it be single family, whether it be villas, whether it be one style or another style, to meet all different types that may be needed. But normally we look at doing the full first phase and then the second phase. But there is potential that maybe that second phase could be split into, I'll call it a 2A and a 2B, just depending on.
Thank you.
Excuse me. The temporary cul-de-sac that's currently on Green Ash Drive to the west of the property, that's going to now become a street. Who owns that cul-de-sac?
So the city owns a temporary easement for that cul-de-sac, but it's, the owner of the lot that it's on actually owns that.
Not in this development, in the Spring Creek?
In Spring Creek,
Okay.
yes. The owner of the lot owns that, but as a
Okay.
condition of this development, they would need to remove that temporary cul-de-sac.
Right.
And then resod it, so basically restore it to what it would look like if it was a yard.
Okay.
And then the city would release the temporary easement once all the connections are made.
Okay. What was the conditional use permit on this property?
Yeah, they have some stockpiles and storage of some materials on this property. So it's a really old conditional use permit that, through the approval process, we would revoke that CUP.
Okay.
CUPs run with the land, so until a city has an ability to revoke the CUP, you can't, there is a process for revocation if they're not meeting the conditions, but generally speaking, if they're meeting the conditions, you can't eliminate a CUP. So we do take these types of opportunities to revoke ones that are
Right.
not
Clean it
going to
up.
be needed.
Yeah, okay.
It was mentioned about power lines being underground, so this whole plat, would all the power lines be underground?
Correct. All new power line installation in the city is underground,
Okay.
but the specific condition is related to the existing power lines that are on the south side of Spring Creek Drive.
And then
That-
who pays for that?
The developer does.
Okay. Thank you. And then I had, I think, just one last question. You mentioned about now that the driveways will be on Spring Creek Drive, or to the villas, the individual driveways. Is it a trail that connects? Will that be the side of the road that would have the sidewalk? How would you go from the existing neighborhood?
Great question. The existing neighborhood on Spring Creek Drive does have a trail, which is a little unusual, because normally we would have a sidewalk in front of homes. But given the topography in that area, we ended up having to take the trail through there when the city developed that property about 10 years ago. So the intent here would be to continue that trail so that we get that trail connectivity from Spring Creek, the neighborhood, over to Mount Hope Road, where you then have an additional, I'm not sure if all the trails installed, but I think it is. Then you can basically make a loop through the city in that location as well, and that would be consistent with your comprehensive plan that shows a trail in this general location. So it would be a trail, it would be the street trail, and then the homes with the driveways crossing the trail, similar to how it is in the neighborhood next door.
It would be nice to see on a map how it would connect, or even how you could go from this new development to Lions Park.
Sure, and that, I don't have a map that I can show you, but how it gets there is pretty simple, because it would just go to Mount Hope Road, and then you'd go down Mount Hope Road to Lions Park.
Is that trail going to be completed around this time? I mean, there's a couple 100-foot gap, right?
There is a couple 100-foot gap, and that couple 100-foot gap includes not only the trail, but also curb and gutter in that location, because it's also still a rural section. So that is something that we are sorting through the details on in order to figure out if we can complete that, and we'll pass that information along to the city council. The intent, though, is to try to figure out a way to complete that.
Madam Chair. Hi, Cindy, question for you. Being a newer member of the Planning Commission, I wasn't here to see the preliminary plat. Just in looking at the information provided and looking through the maps, I didn't see any park area. And just knowing where this is and in relation to other developments, just wondered if I'm missing it in here, or if there was a discussion on whether parks would be accessible for those in this community.
Yep, great question. The Parks Commission did look at it last spring, and they determined that they were not interested in having a park in this location, that they felt that they would rather have park dedication funds in lieu of a park. There isn't a park shown in the city's park plan in this general area, and they're trying to move away from the smaller neighborhood parks to larger community parks.
Thank you.
Okay. The homes across Spring Creek Drive, there's two different types, right? Because it's single family in the yellow and then the villa style in the orange, right?
Correct.
I'm noticing that they have a different setback from the road in the plans, just where the plat of the house is on the lot. Do you know what I'm talking about? That it's different? Is there any issue or concern there? I mean, I realize they're different style of homes. It's just something I noticed.
You're right, there is a difference in the setback. it meets the requirements.
Okay.
Of what we had stated in the PUD.
Okay,
So I don't see an issue. There is a gap as well that,
Yeah, there
you
is,
can see that
between the
provides
two
access
types,
to
yep.
the outlot.
Yep.
So that'll help to
distinguish them.
distinguish them a little bit, but there, there is a little bit of a
Okay,
difference there.
yep, okay.
It's largely due to, you can see there's a stormwater
Yeah,
pond in that.
so I get
or a
kind of
wetland
how
in
it
that
happened. I
location.
just want to understand, are we okay with that? Is it does it meet our guidelines kind of thing?
I have another question, Madam Chair. Cindy, the green on the, let's see, well, off of Spring Creek Drive there, the villas are in the orange, we just said, so there's one lone green guy up there. What was the rationale behind that one be different from the rest in that row?
I think that's just, that's a villa. I think the engineer, when he made this map, probably just colored that wrong. But that's a great catch. We'll ask them to make that change so that we can put a revised one on the city website.
I'm not sure this is the right graphic to look at. I'm having a hard time telling exactly where the sidewalks are in the neighborhood. I don't know that this is the right graphic to look at. Is there a different page I could look at?
It's going to be in your packet. I don't have one that I can show on the slides.
I know, so can you refer to me to which would be best for me to look at?
Give me a quick minute to find that, if that's okay.
I think I see it, I just am not sure. Is there anything?
Unfortunately, it's one of those details that shows up really well when you have the really large versions of the plans.
Yeah,
If you look on any of the,
does this cover
Just as an
sheet 1 of
example, here.
9 show it?
pardon me?
Cover sheet 1 of 9? I don't know, maybe. Does that look like it? And it's there? I don't know, again.
So, yeah, if you're on any given one of the, 6 of 9 or any of those pages,
Okay, hold on. 6 of 9.
I can kind of tell you what the symbolization is. So if you look at Birch Street,
Yeah.
that'll be easy to find.
Yep,
Look where it's intersecting Spring Creek Drive. So on the east side of Birch
Yep.
Street is where the trail is, and it's showing up, or the sidewalk, it's showing up as it's a 5-foot wide strip with some speckle marks in it.
yeah, it's kind of shaded. Okay, I see it.
Yep, so you'll see that there's the sidewalk on one side of every street, and it hugs the right-of-way line. So we
Yep.
always construct our sidewalk right up to the right-of-way line.
And then it's sort of on the inside of the loop of Mulberry.
Yep, it's
Right.
on the inside of the loop.
Okay, and then, hold on, 6 of 9 kind of is the north part. Where's the bottom part? Where's the south part? And is it on the both sides of Green Ash Drive? Can't be.
It's on the south side of Green Ash Drive.
And so then it ends at the cul-de-sac? In Outlot
Correct.
F? Okay.
Correct, and the second phase, it'll end before you reach the cul-de-sac.
And it stays on the east side of Birch Street all the way down to Green Ash Drive?
Correct. Well, it turns into Mulberry
So,
Lane.
sorry, yes.
Yep, but it lines up then with where Mulberry Lane keeps going around the horseshoe.
Okay,
So it's requires as few pedestrian crossings of streets as we can.
Okay.
One other thing I'd like to add, you probably noticed there are still quite a few comments from both myself and Engineering and Public Services. The intent is that the developer will be revising the plans to address those comments before it goes to the city council.
Okay, that's fair.
And on that same note, as far as the wetland review piece of that, that's not concluded either, or is it? Because I can't tell from the memo. It looks like there's like an in-between space that we're at with the comments there.
There is, but the wetland permitting is a separate permit process, and that's not unusual that, say, this permit or approval for the final plat might be issued before every I is dotted and T is crossed on somebody else, on a different permit. We happen to issue the wetlands permit as well, but it's a separate action that,
Okay, so that part of it doesn't need to be included in the recommendations of
it doesn't,
this?
because the two staff memos are included as conditions to be met by reference.
Okay, so as long as that's included as well as the engineering comments,
Correct.
as far as we go, is moving the process forward.
It is, and we do that in a couple of different ways to kind of circle those loops back around and make sure that all that gets done. So in the conditions themselves, and I'm kind of jumping, you have a draft of the conditions, and they might change a little bit as some of these comments get addressed before it goes to council. But there's two things that are always consistent in all of your conditions that end up on a final plat that's approved by the council. The first one is that whatever outstanding comment memos still exist are referenced as a condition that they need to be addressed. So when you see stuff like that in a comment memo, we incorporate that as a condition by reference that they need to address those issues, so that covers that there. And then there's always a second condition that says that the developer needs to secure any other permits that are required by any
Okay,
agency.
so
So on the wetlands in particular, that's a second place.
it'll fall
for
under that.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just a question for the developer. So I apologize if you mentioned this already, but do you have an anticipation timing between sort of phase 1 and phase 2, kind of how you see it? I know you said you wanted to get started this spring on phase 1, but what do you think this is?
We're usually looking about a year apart.
A year
on
apart,
usually
okay.
Some of that, depending on how things go.
Okay.
We could have started last fall and to start issuing or breaking ground and getting so builders could start building, and for spring parade, that would have really helped to
Yeah.
get us to then phase 2, kind of starting the following spring and everything. So, but since that got delayed a little bit, it might be more of a year and a half on that.
Okay.
Because we're not going to be able to start moving dirt until spring, and then by the time the MI Homes is able to start selling and building and stuff, it's going to be, fall for them again.
And this is all single developer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Or single builder, that's the word I was looking for, thank you. You know what I meant. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any more questions. Exhausted me.
Any other questions, clarifications? Okay. Well, we can make a motion to recommend the approval of the final plat, subject to the conditions, which is, I think, 1 through 37 in the staff report.
Yep, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of the final plat of Meadows at Spring Creek, subject to the conditions of the staff reports.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 6, any kind of communications? Anything from anybody else?
I'll just,
Raise your hand. I saw a hand go up.
I have something. Last Monday, the city council interviewed engineering firms for the city engineers position. So we interviewed Stantec and Bolton and Mink. After some consideration and based on some feedback from the council and staff, we decided to appoint Andrew Buddy with Bolton and Mink as the city's new city engineer. So we're excited to have Andrew on board and their whole team, both Andrew and then Andrew's supervisor. They're what they call a principal in charge. His name is Craig Schmidt. They both office out of Chaska. So having their access, not just by kind of phone and email, the traditional senses, but actually physically having them here to help us. We're really looking forward to that. It's a little bittersweet in that I think most of us have all grown to love and admire Dan Boyum's personality and sense of humor. And I had the opportunity to thank him. He's still going to be around working on our 2017 street improvement project. So you still might see him around, but I'll be looking forward to introducing Andrew to the Planning Commission probably at your January meeting. So thank you.
What will we see at the January Planning Commission?
what will we see?
Yeah, what will we see?
You have a few items that you'll see already. So we just received today the final plat for the first phase of the Oak Tree development. So you'll have that at that meeting. And then we are also looking at rezoning the City Hall property. It's currently zoned CBD. So we're rezoning that to public institutional, or proposing to rezone that to public institutional, which is consistent with how you treat your other city properties.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.